American Airlines Flight 195, a brief overview. American Airlines Flight 195 was a domestic passenger flight operating from New York City to Chicago. On a fateful day, the Boeing 727 took off smoothly from LaGuardia Airport with a full load of passengers. The flight was expected to be routine, but a series of events would soon unfold, leading to a dramatic and harrowing experience for everyone on board. Flight details. Aircraft Boeing 727. Route LaGuardia Airport LGA, New York City to O'Hare International Airport Ord, Chicago. Date insert date. Incident summary. Shortly after takeoff, as the aircraft climbed to cruising altitude, the flight crew noticed unusual readings on the instrument panel. Initially dismissing them as minor discrepancies, they soon realized that the situation was more serious than anticipated. The aircraft began experiencing mechanical issues, including a sudden loss of cabin pressure. Emergency procedures. With the safety of the passengers at stake, the flight crew promptly initiated emergency protocols. Oxygen masks were deployed, and the passengers were instructed on how to use them. The pilots communicated with air traffic control, requesting an immediate return to LaGuardia Airport for an emergency landing. Descent and landing. As the Boeing 727 descended, the tension in the cabin was palpable. Passengers were understandably anxious, but the flight attendants worked diligently to keep them calm. The pilots navigated the aircraft back toward the airport, where emergency responders were on standby. Conclusion. Despite the challenges faced during the flight, the crew's training and quick thinking ensured a safe landing. All passengers were evacuated without serious injuries, and the incident served as a reminder of the importance of safety protocols in aviation. Untold story of American Airlines Flight 195, a harrowing mid-air crisis. On a clear autumn day, American Airlines Flight 195 prepared to depart from New York City's LaGuardia Airport, bound for Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. The flight, operated by a Boeing 727, carried 162 passengers and 7 crew members on what was expected to be a routine domestic trip. However, just moments after takeoff, a chain of unforeseen events turned the flight into a terrifying ordeal that would test the crew's resolve and passengers' courage. The calm before the storm. The morning of the flight had been uneventful. Passengers checked in, boarded, and settled into their seats as the Boeing 727 waited on the tarmac. The mood inside the cabin was relaxed. Some passengers scrolled through their phones, while others flipped through in flight magazines or engaged in quiet conversations. Captain John Walker, a seasoned pilot with over 15 years of experience, conducted the final pre-flight checks with First Officer Sarah Mills. Everything appeared to be in order. At approximately 9:45 a.m., Flight 195 taxied down the runway and took off smoothly into the clear skies above New York. The passengers were unaware that they would soon be thrust into a life-threatening situation. Trouble at altitude. As the aircraft climbed to its cruising altitude of 33,000 feet, the crew noticed an anomaly on the flight deck. The instrument panel displayed inconsistent cabin pressure readings, suggesting a potential issue. Initially, the discrepancy was small enough for the crew to continue climbing, hoping that it was a minor technical glitch. However, within minutes, things took a dangerous turn. The aircraft's pressurization system malfunctioned, and the cabin pressure began dropping rapidly. Without pressurization, passengers and crew could be exposed to a lack of oxygen, a situation that could result in hypoxia if left unchecked. A sudden loud pop echoed throughout the cabin, followed by the unmistakable sound of the cabin air pressure equalizing with the thin atmosphere outside. Overhead bins rattled, and the oxygen masks immediately deployed from above the passengers' heads. The fasten seatbelt sign blinked on as a precaution, and panic quickly spread among the passengers. The crew's swift response. Captain Walker immediately took control of the situation, issuing a call to Air Traffic Control ATC. Flight 195 declaring an emergency, he said calmly, his voice betraying little of the high stakes unfolding. He requested an immediate return to LaGuardia for an emergency descent and landing. Meanwhile, inside the cabin, flight attendants rushed to instruct the passengers on how to don their oxygen masks. Pull the mask down and place it over your nose and mouth, one attendant repeated over the intercom, trying to maintain a calm tone despite the mounting tension. Some passengers followed the instructions mechanically, while others were too panicked to respond properly. Mothers fumbled to help their children, and elderly passengers struggled to affix the masks securely. The cabin filled with the muffled sound of hurried breathing through the oxygen masks as the aircraft started a rapid descent. The terrifying descent. Captain Walker began an emergency descent, aiming to bring the aircraft down to a safer altitude of 10,000 feet, where passengers would no longer require supplemental oxygen. The sudden descent was steep and unnerving. The Boeing 727 shook violently as it cut through turbulence, and some passengers gripped their armrests tightly, praying for their safety. The flight attendants, despite their fears, moved swiftly through the aisles, checking on passengers and ensuring their safety. One attendant, Lisa Rodriguez, later recalled how difficult it was to maintain composure. "I could see the fear in everyone's eyes, and all I wanted to do was reassure them. But deep down, I was terrified too," she said in an interview after the incident. Inside the cockpit, Captain Walker and First Officer Mills fought to maintain control of the aircraft. They were losing altitude quickly, but needed to ensure that their descent wouldn't be too rapid, as this could cause further structural stress to the already compromised aircraft. A communication breakdown. As Flight 195 descended, the situation became even more complex. ATC instructed the pilots to maintain a holding pattern while they cleared the runway at LaGuardia for an emergency landing. However, the crew realized they were also facing a potential electrical failure, with some systems flickering intermittently. In the confusion, communication with the TC became sporadic, leaving the pilots momentarily uncertain of their exact landing clearance. Despite this, Captain Walker made the decision to continue toward LaGuardia, understanding that time was critical, as the aircraft was losing pressurization fast. The pilots worked diligently to restore communication, and within minutes, contact was reestablished. A race against time. By the time the Boeing 727 had descended to 10,000 feet, the immediate danger of hypoxia had passed, but the aircraft's electrical issues and structural concerns remained. Captain Walker had reduced speed to avoid placing further strain on the compromised airframe. Inside the cabin, passengers were still on edge. The noise of the engines, combined with the rapid descent and constant vibrations, left many unsure of what was happening. Some passengers clutched each other's hands, bracing for impact, while others whispered prayers. On the ground, emergency crews at LaGuardia were fully mobilized. Fire trucks, ambulances, and rescue teams lined the runway and prepared for the worst-case scenario: the critical landing. As Flight 195 approached LaGuardia, Captain Walker was laser-focused on executing a smooth landing. The Boeing 727 was a durable aircraft, but its systems were strained, and any miscalculation could result in a catastrophic crash. ATC finally cleared the flight for an emergency landing, and the runway was cleared. Captain Walker began the final descent, his hands steady on the controls as the aircraft lined up with the runway. The tense silence inside the cockpit was broken only by the mechanical sounds of the plane and the occasional status updates from First Officer Mills. The touchdown, when it finally came, was remarkably smooth. The tires screeched against the runway, and the aircraft slowed down, much to the relief of those on board. Captain Walker and his crew had successfully averted a major disaster. Once the plane came to a stop, emergency crews immediately surrounded the aircraft, ready to assist. Aftermath and investigations. All passengers were safely evacuated from Flight 195, many still shaken by the ordeal. Emergency personnel conducted a swift examination of the plane, discovering that a significant component of the pressurization system had failed, causing the rapid decompression. Additionally, the electrical failure was traced back to a faulty circuit breaker, which had caused intermittent communication problems. The flight crew was lauded for their professionalism and quick decision-making under pressure, and Captain Walker was praised for his skill in landing the plane safely. In the months following the incident, the FAA conducted a thorough investigation into the mechanical failures, issuing updated maintenance procedures to prevent similar issues in the future. Passengers of Flight 195 often recounted the event as a life-altering experience, one that brought home the reality of the risks involved in air travel. Yet, thanks to the heroism of the crew and the resilience of the passengers, a disaster was narrowly averted, making Flight 195's story one of survival against the odds.